The cowboy stopped the music with just one sentence, and suddenly nobody in the dance hall could look away from the bride. Snow hammered the windows, while Savannah stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, her fingers trembling inside worn-out gloves. Whiskey glasses stopped halfway to men's mouths. Somewhere near the piano, a woman let out a nervous laugh. Then Coulter Hayes stepped closer, his voice low and steady enough to silence the entire room. And what he said next made even Vernon Pike's smile disappear. If this story pulls you in, stay with us until the very end. The dust rolled through Silver Creek like smoke that afternoon. It clung to wagon wheels, drifted across wooden storefronts, and settled on the boots of men standing outside Murphy's saloon with whiskey glasses in their hands. Somewhere farther down Main Street, a blacksmith hammered iron against iron. Slow, heavy, the sound echoed between the buildings beneath a pale Colorado sky. Savannah Reed kept her eyes lowered as the old wagon rattled over the uneven road. The sleeves of her faded cream dress scratched against her wrists. It had once belonged to her Aunt Clara years ago, before the fabric yellowed from time and sunlight. The hem had been patched twice. One side sat uneven near her ankle. People noticed. People always noticed. "Well, I'll be damned," one man muttered near the saloon porch. Hayes finally lost his mind. Low laughter followed. Savannah tightened her grip on the small brown suitcase resting beside her knees. The leather was cracked near the handle. One corner had split open and been stitched shut with fishing line. The wagon stopped in front of the trading post. Her aunt didn't look at her. Clara Reed kept both hands folded tight in her lap, like if she loosened them even once, she might start crying or praying. Maybe both. "You remember what I told you?" Clara whispered. Savannah nodded once. "Don't argue. Don't shame the family. Do what keeps you alive." The driver climbed down first. He smelled like tobacco and horse sweat. Without speaking, he dropped Savannah's suitcase into the dirt hard enough to splash mud across the side. Nobody moved to help her. Across the street, two women stood near the mercantile, pretending not to stare. One leaned close to the other and whispered something that made them both smirk. Savannah stepped down slowly from the wagon. The moment her boots touched the ground, a woman near the saloon spat tobacco juice into the dust inches from her feet. Not close enough to hit her, close enough to make the point. Savannah heard another laugh, then another. Silver Creek was not a large town. News traveled faster than wildfire through dry grass. By noon, everybody already knew Vernon Pike had arranged some kind of marriage deal between Coulter Hayes and the poor black seamstress from near the stagecoach station. Nobody believed it was real. That made it entertaining. Vernon Pike himself stood outside the bank in a dark coat, with a silver watch chain stretched across his vest. He smiled like a man watching a card game he already knew the ending to. "Well," Vernon called loudly. "There she is." Savannah looked away from him. That seemed to amuse him more. "You nervous girl." Before she could answer, someone kicked her suitcases from behind. The case rolled sideways through the mud. Laughter exploded this time. Savannah felt heat crawl into her throat, but she bent down anyway. Quiet, steady. She reached for the handle. A shadow crossed beside her. A large, rough hand lifted the suitcase first. The street slowly went quiet. Coulter Hayes stood there with dust on his coat and snowmelt dried along his boots. Tall, broad through the shoulders. Dark hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. He didn't look at Savannah first. He looked at the muddy suitcase, then at the man who kicked it. The cowboy near the saloon suddenly found great interest in the ground. Without speaking, Coulter set the suitcase carefully back onto the wagon seat. Only then did he look at Savannah. His eyes were gray, cold-looking at first glance, but not cruel. Just tired. "You Savannah Reed?" he asked. His voice sounded rough like gravel under wagon wheels. "Yes, sir." A pause. Then Vernon Pike stepped forward, smiling wider than before. "Well now, Hayes," Vernon said, spreading his arms. "You really planning to make this girl the lady of your ranch?" A few men chuckled again. Coulter finally turned toward him. At least she knows how to work, he said. Silence hit the street so fast it felt physical. Even the laughter died halfway out of somebody's mouth. Vernon's smile thinned slightly. Savannah looked at Coulter then. Really looked at him for the first time. He wasn't handsome in the polished way rich men in town tried to be. His coat needed brushing. His jaw carried 2 days of beard. One sleeve had been repaired near the wrist. But he stood like a man completely certain of himself. The kind of man who did not move aside once he planted his boots somewhere. "Wagons ready," he said quietly to Savannah. That was all. No welcome, no kindness, but no humiliation either. And after the day she'd had, that felt dangerously close to mercy. The ride out of Silver Creek happened beneath a sky turning orange behind the mountains. The Hayes Ranch sat deep in the valley, west of town, where the land opened wide beneath the San Juan peaks. Pine forests climbed the slopes in dark green waves. Thin ribbons of snow still clung to the higher ridges even though autumn had settled across Colorado. Savannah sat stiff beside the wagon seat while Coulter drove. He spoke only once. "You cold?" "No." Another silence followed. The ranch appeared slowly through the dusk, a long wooden fence, 2 barns, a bunkhouse with smoke curling from the chimney, lantern light glowing warm inside the main house windows. Several cowboys looked up as the wagon rolled into the yard. One of them, young, blonde, sharp-faced, stared openly at Savannah. Eli Turner. His mouth twisted slightly before he looked away. Nobody came forward to greet her. The horses snorted clouds into the cold evening air. Coulter climbed down first. "You'll sleep in the back room near the kitchen," he said. "Mrs. Bailey cooks mornings. Stay out of her way till she gets used to you." Savannah nodded. Still no mention of marriage, still no explanation. But exhaustion sat too deep in her bones to ask questions. Inside, the ranch house smelled like coffee grounds, leather, and wood smoke. A clock ticked slowly near the fireplace. Somewhere upstairs, floorboards creaked beneath heavy boots. Her room was small. 1 narrow bed, 1 wash basin, 1 wool blanket folded neat at the corner. Savannah sat on the edge of the mattress long after the house went quiet. Outside, wind pushed softly against the walls. Then, sometime near midnight, a sound. Slow footsteps near the horse barn. Savannah frowned. Another sound followed. Metal scraping wood. She moved to the tiny window. At first, she saw only darkness and blowing dust. Then a lantern flickered briefly near the lower fence line. A man-shaped shadow moved beside the horses. Savannah's stomach tightened. A second later came the sharp snap of wire being cut, and one of the horses screamed. Savannah was already moving before she realized it. She shoved the thin blanket aside and rushed barefoot across the cold wooden floor. The hallway outside her room sat dark except for weak moonlight leaking through the front windows. Another horse kicked hard against wood. Men shouted outside. "Damn it!" Boots thundered overhead. Savannah grabbed the lantern, hanging beside the kitchen door, and pushed outside into the freezing night air. Wind swept through the yard, carrying the smell of dust and frightened animals. The lower fence near the east pasture hung open. 2 horses were loose already, running wild near the water trough. Coulter Hayes crossed the yard fast with a rifle in one hand and rope in the other. Eli Turner followed behind him, half-dressed, still pulling suspenders over his shoulders. "You see anybody?" Coulter barked. Savannah pointed toward the tree line near the creek. There. For half a second she saw the shadow again. A rider, disappearing into darkness, then gone. Coulter didn't hesitate. He swung onto his horse bareback and rode hard into the night without another word. The yard slowly settled after that. Cowboys dragged fence wire back into place under lantern light. Somebody cursed while hammering a post crooked into frozen ground. The horses kept snorting nervously. Eli stopped beside Savannah. "You should be inside," he muttered. "I heard the wire. Still should be inside." His tone wasn't cruel exactly, just dismissive. Savannah handed him the lantern anyway. By the time Coulter returned near dawn, frost coated the shoulders of his coat. He looked colder somehow than the mountain air itself. "Couldn't catch him," he said shortly to the men. But he knew the layout too well. That made the yard go quiet. Someone familiar with the ranch. Someone watching. Savannah noticed Eli glance away. First, morning arrived gray and bitter cold. Mrs. Bailey, the cook, handed Savannah a broom without introduction while biscuits baked inside the iron stove. "You eat after the men," she said. "Coffee's there if you want it." Savannah nodded. The kitchen smelled like burnt bacon grease and wood smoke. She rolled up her sleeves and started sweeping without complaint. Outside the windows, ranch hands crossed the muddy yard carrying feed sacks toward the barn. Nobody spoke to her, not really. At breakfast, the men crowded around the long pine table, laughing about cattle prices and winter storms coming down from Telluride Pass. Savannah stayed near the stove, filling cups quietly. One cowboy moved his tin mug just as she poured, letting hot coffee spill across the table edge. A few snickers followed. "Careful there," he said. "Wouldn't want to waste Hayes' good beans." Savannah grabbed a rag and cleaned it silently. Across the table, Coulter kept eating. No expression, no reaction. But later that afternoon, Savannah found a fresh pair of work gloves folded outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation. The gloves were exactly her size. Days passed that way. Cold mornings, long chores, quiet humiliation. Savannah learned the ranch rhythm quickly. Wake before sunrise, heat water, patch torn saddle leather, scrub muddy floors, carry beans and salt pork to the cookhouse. At night, her shoulders ached so badly she could barely untie her boots. Still, she never complained, and slowly little things began changing. One evening, she corrected numbers in the feed ledger after noticing two missing sacks accounted twice. Another morning, she spotted swelling in one mare's front leg before the stable hands noticed it. Coulter said nothing, but he started watching her more carefully. Not openly, just small glances. A pause when she spoke. An extra second standing near the kitchen doorway. Then came the calf. Rain hammered the ranch hard that night. Wind rattled the barn roof while thunder rolled down from the mountains. Savannah had gone outside to secure laundry lines when she heard weak crying near the creek. At first, she thought it was a child. Then she saw the calf trapped against rocks in the swollen water. The current slammed hard around its thin body. Savannah climbed down without thinking. The water hit like melted ice. By the time Eli and another cowboy reached the creek, Savannah already had both arms wrapped around the terrified calf, dragging it inch by inch toward shore. Mud covered her dress nearly to the waist. Her hands shook violently from cold. "You're crazy," Eli muttered, grabbing the rope line. Maybe she was, but the calf lived. That same night, Coulter stopped outside the kitchen while Savannah dried blankets near the stove. "You could drown." Savannah kept folding cloth carefully. So could the calf. Silence. Then the faintest shift near his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. A week later, rain returned again. Heavy, relentless. Most of the ranch hands were inside the bunkhouse, playing cards when Savannah smelled smoke. Not fireplace smoke, oil smoke, sharp and wrong. She ran toward the hay storage barn. Flames already crawled along one corner beam where a lantern had shattered against the wall. Someone had cut the hook holding it. "Fire!" Savannah screamed. She grabbed a horse blanket and slammed it against the flames before they reached the dry hay stacks. Heat tore through the cloth instantly. By the time Eli burst through the doors carrying buckets, Savannah's bare hands were burned raw and red, but the fire never spread. Later, while rain drummed against the roof, Eli sat across from her at the kitchen table, watching Mrs. Bailey wrap Savannah's hands in clean linen. "You saw the lantern?" he asked quietly. Savannah nodded once. "Hook didn't break by itself." Eli looked toward the dark windows. Neither of them said Vernon Pike's name, but both thought it. The next morning, Savannah walked into breakfast, expecting the usual silence. Instead, Coulter stood from the table. Every cowboy watched him. Without speaking, he picked up a plate of eggs and biscuits and set it down in the empty space beside his own chair. For her, nobody laughed, nobody moved. Savannah hesitated only a second before sitting. Across the table, Eli lowered his eyes to his coffee. And outside, beyond the frost-covered windows, snow clouds gathered slowly over the mountains. The first hard freeze came 2 nights later. Water buckets formed thin ice before sunrise. Horses breathed white steam into the dark. The wind rolling down from the San Juan Mountains carried that sharp smell of early winter and pine bark. By then, folks in Silver Creek had already started talking about the fall gathering. Every rancher came, every banker, every widow looking for a husband, and every gambler pretending he still had money left. Savannah heard about it while scrubbing pans near the kitchen sink. Mrs. Bailey shook flour from her hands and muttered, "Whole town will be there. Saturday." Savannah kept washing quietly. A second later, Mrs. Bailey glanced over her shoulder. "Means you too." Savannah stopped moving. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't." But by Friday afternoon, Coulter stood outside the kitchen doorway, holding a small brown parcel wrapped in twine. "You're coming." Savannah stared at the package in his hands. "I don't belong in places like that. You belong where my name takes you." The words were plain, matter-of-fact. Still, something about them settled deep in her chest. He left before she answered. Inside the parcel sat a pair of new leather boots, dark honey brown. Strong stitching around the heel, not fancy, just practical. Savannah touched them for a long moment before trying them on. Perfect fit. Saturday night arrived bitter cold. The dance hall in Silver Creek glowed warm against the snowy streets, lantern light spilling across wagon tracks and hitching rails. Music drifted through the walls from a fiddle and upright piano, already playing inside. Savannah nearly turned around twice before reaching the front steps. Women in polished dresses paused talking when she entered. Men near the whiskey table went quiet for half a breath too long. Savannah felt every eye in the room touch her worn blue dress. Not new, not expensive, but clean and carefully pressed. Ruth Pike stood near the center of the hall, wrapped in crimson silk with gold pins in her hair. She smiled the moment she saw Coulter. "Well," she said lightly, stepping closer. "Silver Creek nearly thought you forgot how to attend civilized events." Coulter removed his gloves slowly. "I came for the cattle auction." Ruth's smile flickered when she noticed Savannah beside him. "Oh," she said, "of course." One woman brushed fingers against Savannah's sleeve as she passed. "My goodness," she murmured to her friend. "That fabric looks like curtain cloth." Soft laughter followed. Savannah lowered her eyes. The room suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. She could smell cigar smoke, perfume, and roasted meat from the buffet tables. Somewhere glasses clinked together while boots scraped wood floors. Nobody said anything openly cruel. That somehow felt worse. For nearly an hour, Savannah stayed near the wall while Coulter spoke quietly with ranchers and freight men. Ruth lingered beside him almost the entire time. Savannah noticed people watching, waiting, judging how long she would last before slipping out the door. Then Vernon Pike arrived. The banker entered laughing loudly, with 3 men behind him, snow melting from the shoulders of their coats. His silver watch chain gleamed beneath the lanterns. "Well now," Vernon called across the room. Hayes finally decided to bring his bride into public. The music softened awkwardly. Savannah reached for her gloves. Maybe she could leave without anyone noticing. Then the band changed songs, a slow waltz. And before anyone understood what he intended, Coulter Hayes crossed the entire dance floor straight toward her. The room quieted one table at a time. Savannah looked up as he stopped inches away. His hand lifted, large, steady, waiting. "Dance with me." Her breath caught. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." The whole hall watched Savannah place her hand into his. Coulter pulled her gently toward the center floor. Nobody laughed now. His hand rested lightly against her back, while the music carried around them slow and low beneath the lantern glow. Savannah could feel the rough calluses on his palm even through her gloves. "You're shaking," he murmured. "So is everybody else." For the first time that night, the corner of Coulter's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but enough. Around them, the room stayed strangely still. Then Vernon's voice cut through the music. A woman like her must be worth quite a sacrifice, Hayes. Several people looked away immediately. Coulter stopped dancing. Slowly, he turned toward Vernon Pike. The banker smirked into his whiskey glass. "What exactly does she bring a man like you?" Vernon asked. The silence that followed stretched across the whole hall. Savannah felt every heartbeat inside her chest. Then Coulter answered, "She's worth more than all the gold you ever touched." No one moved. Even the piano player missed 2 notes. Ruth Pike's face drained pale beneath the lantern light, and Savannah could not speak at all, because Coulter never raised his voice, never performed for crowds, which meant every word he said came from somewhere honest. A minute later, the music slowly returned, but the room had changed. People stepped aside when Savannah passed after that. Cowboys tipped their hats slightly. Even the bartender spoke softer when asking what she wanted to drink. Near midnight, snow finally began falling outside. Coulter helped Savannah into the wagon beneath a sky thick with white. Neither spoke much on the road home. Only the creak of harness leather and distant wind across frozen fields filled the silence between them. Then somewhere near Black Creek Ridge, Coulter suddenly pulled the reins hard. The wagon stopped. Savannah looked ahead. The gate near the lower grazing valley hung wide open. Her stomach tightened instantly. No! Coulter was already climbing down. The snow carried strange tracks everywhere. Hooves, drag marks, broken fence posts half buried beneath drifting white powder. Then came the sound. Far off in the darkness, cattle bawling, moving fast. Too fast. Coulter's face turned hard as stone. They took half the herd, and somewhere beyond the storm-dark hills, riders disappeared into the night with the future of the Hayes Ranch. Snow whipped sideways across the valley while Coulter stood beside the broken fence line, staring into the darkness where the cattle had vanished. Savannah climbed down from the wagon carefully, boots sinking into wet slush. "How many?" she asked quietly. Coulter rubbed a hand across his beard. "Too many." The words came flat, heavy. Eli rode in from the south pasture 10 minutes later with frost gathered on his coat collar. "Tracks split near Black Creek," he said. 3 riders. Maybe 4, Coulter nodded once. No anger. That almost felt worse. Back at the ranch house, lanterns stayed lit long past midnight. Wet gloves hung near the stove. Snow melted into puddles across the wood floor while men spread maps over the dining table. Savannah stood near the doorway listening. "The pass'll close by morning," Eli warned. Coulter traced a finger across the mountain route. "Then we ride before daylight," Mrs. Bailey muttered under her breath. "Lord help fools traveling those roads in winter." Nobody answered. Around 2 in the morning, Savannah carried fresh coffee into the room. Coulter had not removed his coat once. She set the cup beside him carefully. "You should eat something." "I'm fine." But his hand brushed the side of hers for half a second when he reached for the coffee. Small, accidental maybe. Still, neither pulled away immediately. Outside, the wind rattled the windows hard enough to shake dust from the beams. By sunrise, 6 riders prepared to leave. The cold looked vicious now. Sharp blue sky above the mountains. Snow packed stiff across the trails. Horses restless from the smell of coming weather. Savannah stood beside the barn while Coulter tightened his saddle straps. "You don't have enough men left here," he said without looking at her. "We'll manage." "That isn't what I asked." She folded her arms against the cold. A long silence passed between them. Finally, Coulter reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small iron key. "The feed storage lock." Savannah stared at it. "Why give this to me? Because if anything happens while I'm gone, you'll know what to do." Before she could answer, he mounted his horse, then paused. "You see trouble," he said, eyes finally meeting hers. "You send for Sheriff Boone. Don't try fixing it alone." Savannah almost smiled. "You married the wrong woman for that." For the first time in days, Coulter's expression softened. only slightly. Then the riders disappeared into the white hills beyond the valley. The ranch grew strangely quiet after they left. Too quiet. Savannah noticed things she had missed before. The water trough near the north fence had frozen solid faster than it should have. One sack of winter grain smelled bitter underneath the salt. And twice that week she caught Hank Dugan watching the ranch office whenever she walked past. Hank had worked for Coulter nearly 12 years. Thick shoulders, permanent tobacco stains on his fingers. The kind of man nobody questioned because he always seemed to belong there. But Savannah noticed how quickly he looked away now. 3 days later, another storm rolled down from the mountains. Eli's spare horse returned near dusk without a rider. The entire ranch yard went still. Savannah grabbed her coat immediately. "Horses don't come back empty unless something happened," she said. Mrs. Bailey blocked the doorway. "You can't ride in this weather." But Savannah was already pulling on gloves. The snow outside cut like broken glass against her face. She found Eli nearly an hour later, near Miller's Ridge, half buried beside the trail, blood frozen dark along his temple. Nearby, the leather case carrying the valley water maps had been ripped open. Savannah's stomach dropped. Someone wanted the ranch dry before spring. She struggled to pull Eli onto her horse when another sound rose through the storm, boots crunching snow. Hank Dugan stepped from the trees, holding a rifle. "You should have stayed home," he said. The wind screamed across the ridge between them. Savannah's fingers tightened around the reins. Then she saw it. Inside Hank's coat pocket sat folded bank papers stamped with Vernon Pike's seal. Everything suddenly made sense. The cut fence, the poisoned grain, the missing herd. Hank raised the rifle slightly. "Give me the ledger bag." Savannah glanced down. Eli must have grabbed it before being attacked. The leather sat tied behind her saddle. Proof. Real proof. Snow blasted sideways harder now, almost blinding. Then the horse beneath Savannah slipped violently on hidden ice. The world tilted. She heard Eli shouting somewhere behind her. The rifle cracked once into the storm, and suddenly horse, snow, sky, and mountains all disappeared together. As Savannah tumbled down the frozen slope into darkness, the fall seemed endless. Ice shattered beneath her boots. Branches scraped her coat sleeves. Snow packed into her mouth every time she tried to breathe. Then everything stopped hard against a drift near the bottom of the ravine. For several seconds she could not move. Only the wind moved, cold, loud, merciless. Savannah rolled onto her side slowly, coughing snow from her throat. Pain burned through her shoulder and hip. Somewhere above, faint voices echoed through the storm. Hank, Eli. Then silence again. Her horse was gone. The leather satchel, however, remained tangled around her wrist. Savannah grabbed it instantly against her chest. Even half frozen, she understood what sat inside that bag. Bank papers, bribes, false debt records, everything Vernon Pike never wanted seen. Snowflakes collected thick across her eyelashes while she struggled upright. The storm had turned savage now. Night pressed against the valley early, swallowing the mountains whole. She took one step, then another. The cold reached through her soaked boots like knives. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe only minutes. At one point, Savannah stumbled beside a pine tree and nearly stayed there. The snow beneath the branches looked soft, quiet, warm almost. Then she heard something faint through the wind. A horse bell, far away. Her eyes lifted weakly toward the ridge above. Nothing but white. Then suddenly, a lantern glow appeared through the storm. Moving, searching. "Savannah." Coulter's voice, rough, dinsed, desperate. She tried answering, but barely managed a sound. The lantern moved again, closer now. And then Coulter Hayes came crashing down the slope on horseback through the blowing snow like a man chasing death itself. The second he spotted her, he jumped from the saddle so fast he nearly fell. Jesus Christ. His gloves hit the ground as he dropped beside her in the snow. Savannah tried speaking. "The papers, that can wait." But even then, her frozen fingers refused to release the satchel. Coulter looked at it once, then back at her face, Something inside his expression changed. Not shock, not pity, understanding. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders before lifting her carefully against him. Savannah felt the heat from his body through the layers of freezing fabric. "You came back," she whispered weakly. Coulter looked down at her like the answer should have been obvious. "There wasn't anywhere else I'd be." The ride home felt like a dream swallowed by snow and lantern light. By dawn, the storm finally broke over Silver Creek. The ranch yard looked buried beneath white hills. Men shoveled paths between the barn and main house while smoke rose from every chimney against the pale morning sky. Inside, Savannah woke near the kitchen stove beneath 3 wool blankets. Mrs. Bailey pressed hot coffee into her hands immediately. "Drink." Her fingers shook too badly at first. Across the room, Eli's with bandages around his head while Sheriff Boone read through the soaked documents spread across the dining table. Every page carried Vernon Pike's seal. Illegal land transfers, paid theft records, names, dates, amounts, enough to ruin half the powerful men in Silver Creek. By noon, Vernon Pike himself rode into the ranch yard with 3 deputies and a wagon, believing the Hayes Ranch had finally collapsed under debt. Instead, he found nearly the entire valley standing there waiting. Snow dripped from Vernon's coat as Sheriff Boone stepped forward, holding the recovered papers. The banker's confidence cracked instantly. "You've got no right." "I've got signatures," Boone interrupted coldly. One by one, names were read aloud across the frozen yard. Hank Dugan had already been caught near the North Bridge before sunrise, trying to cross out of the valley. Now, even the ranch hands who once feared Vernon refused to look away. Vernon finally spotted Savannah standing near the porch steps, wrapped in Coulter's heavy coat. His mouth twisted bitterly. "All this trouble," he muttered, "over a woman who walked into town with nothing." The yard went silent. Coulter stepped forward slowly from the porch. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Then he stopped beside Savannah. "The woman standing here," he said calmly, "kept this ranch alive while the rest of you waited for it to die. Nobody moved. Even the horses seemed still." Then Coulter reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a document. Sheriff Boone glanced at it once before lifting his eyebrows slightly. Land transfer papers. Coulter placed them directly into Savannah's hands. "Not charity, not repayment, partnership. You earned it," he said simply. Savannah stared at the paper without speaking. Because all her life people had handed her things with conditions attached. Work, debt, silence. This felt different. Coulter's hand rested briefly against the small of her back. Steady, certain. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Savannah no longer felt like someone merely surviving the winter. Spring returned slowly to the valley after that. Snow melted along the fence lines first. Then the grass pushed through again across the lower fields in soft green end waves, and the ranch survived. Barely, but it survived. One warm evening near the end of April, Savannah rode along the western pasture checking calves while golden sunlight stretched across the hills. The same cowboys who once laughed at her now tipped their hats when she passed. Near the upper fence line, Coulter worked alone, repairing broken boards. He looked up as Savannah approached. Wind moved gently through the tall grass around them. Neither spoke right away. They didn't need to. Coulter removed one glove slowly and rested his arm across the fence rail while watching her horse step closer. Savannah smiled faintly, soft, real. Below them, cattle bells echoed through the valley while the last snow still clung to the far mountain peaks beyond Silver Creek. And somewhere between the quiet wind, the worn fence posts, and the man waiting beside the open pasture, Savannah finally understood something. Some people spent their whole lives searching for gold. Others found something far rarer. Someone who saw their worth before the rest of the world ever did. And maybe that's the part that stays with you after the story ends. Not the snowstorm, not the stolen cattle, not even the moment Coulter Hayes stood in front of an entire town and chose Savannah openly. Maybe it's the quiet things. A lantern left burning in the window. A coat wrapped around cold shoulders. A hand reaching out in a room where everyone else looked away. Because if you've lived long enough, you know life doesn't always break people with one big tragedy. Sometimes it's years of feeling unseen. Years of carrying pain quietly while the world keeps moving around you. And maybe, somewhere deep down, all of us hope that one day somebody will look at us the way Coulter looked at Savannah. Not for what we own, not for where we came from, just for who we are when the hard winters come. That kind of love doesn't shout very often, but it stays. So before you go, tell me this in the comments. What was the moment in this story that touched you the most? And if stories like this still make you believe in loyalty, healing, and the kind of love that stands steady through every storm, then stay a little longer with this channel. There are still more dusty trails ahead, more forgotten towns, more hearts learning how to trust again beneath these wide western skies.